A lot of Jewish art tends to focus on thematic. It can be very utilitarian. It can tend to focus on the group. And even if it's not art, you could imagine a photo of a whole bunch of Holocaust survivors. A wedding or a wedding painting is a very iconic kind of Jewish shtick. A photograph of a funeral in Israel in which you could have like 10,000, because we show up en masse for big funerals. So you could have 100,000 hats, big repetition stuff. But like, I don't know a single thing about any one of those individuals. And personally, as an artist, that rankles me. And so like, I set off on a mission to go learn a lot more about these individuals.
Well, hey everyone. Welcome to episode 438 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen. I'm your host, Matt Payne, and this week I'm excited to share a conversation that ventures far beyond the typical wedding photography discussions. My guest is Seth Robbins, a photographer whose new book, A Trustworthy Home, takes an intimate insider's look at Orthodox Jewish weddings, exploring them not as commercial events, but as deliberately transcendental experiences that reveal something deeper about community, ritual, and trust. Seth and I talk about what it means to photograph people without turning them into trophies, how he gained genuine insider status to make this work possible, and what landscape and nature photographers can learn from his slow, respectful approach to cultural storytelling. And if you enjoy this episode, there's even more waiting for you over on Patreon. Seth and I recorded a very special bonus segment exclusively for supporters, where he talks about his project of photographing the hidden fishing culture of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Well, before we jump in, a huge thank you to our newest Patreon supporter, Paul Saunders. Your support helps to keep this show running strong and as ad-free as possible. If you would like to support the show, visit patreon.com/fstopandlisten. Okay, here's my conversation with Seth Robbins. All right, Seth Robbins, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Pleasure to be here. Been looking forward to it. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, awesome. I had to laugh because before we started recording, you said I was famous, which I'm like, I have no idea what
World
you mean
famous.
by that.
World famous.
I was like, no, man, you have your own book, and come on. Well, Seth, I'm excited for this conversation. This should be completely different than anything we've done before. Why don't you go ahead and start off by introducing yourself for our listeners? Who is Seth Robbins?
Sure. Seth Robbins. I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I actually grew up on the West Coast, like a number of photographers who've been on the podcast recently. Grew up in Eugene, Oregon, and in Los Angeles. So I acquired, growing up, a real outdoors orientation, a lot of time on trails, a lot of time at the coast, and gaining a real appreciation for all of that. But the truth is that my family goes way back in Milwaukee. I'm a fifth generation Milwaukeean. I'm the only one in my whole family, me and my brother, not born in Milwaukee at our generational line, making my kids sixth generation Milwaukeean. So we have deep, deep roots here, a lot of ghosts to find, which make it fun to photograph too. I got a day job. I'm in a thing called sales operations. I lead the operations on the sales side of a company and a technology company. It's kind of a cross section between strategy and finance and tech, and you're nodding, so maybe you know what this thing is, but many people don't whenever I use that phrase. Rock climb for fun, try to be on a trail when I can, spend a lot of time on spiritual work, and then honing my craft in photography.
I love that. And I think this will help contextually, but for those not watching a video, how would you describe what you look like?
Indeed. Well, I've got a big old beard. It used to have a lot more color in it, and nowadays it's a lot whiter and grayer. And I'm wearing a big black yarmulke. I'm a religious Jew, and the content and the substance of a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, which is I think one reason why it's a little bit different for the podcast in general, has a lot to do with a book that I published that is full of that very content. When I talk about spiritual here, of course, I'm talking about Jewish stuff. And whenever I talk about Jewish stuff, just so we can save all of the all of the labeling for later. I mean traditional, I mean Orthodox. There's a lot of Jews in the world and they think a lot of different things, but I'm talking about the 3,800-year-old flavor.
Gotcha. Well, I will tell you this, it might be helpful for you. I know very little about Judaism, just enough to be dangerous. So don't be afraid to, educate me and our listeners as we go along. And it'll be helpful in terms of the context of our conversation.
Yeah, 100%. Actually, I intended the book to be for everybody. I intended the discussions to be for everybody. I try to have a fairly light touch with things religious because I want it eventually to be ultimately for everybody. But sometimes it takes a little bit of explanation, and I don't mind explaining where it's needed.
Cool. Love it. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about how you first got into photography and what drew you towards photographing people and cultural rituals.
Sure. So it's a long trajectory, obviously, but when I'm thinking about it, I'm often in my mind starting with a college 101 English course in which a TA that I had, and I don't know why, and I don't know what happened, but the guy marches into class one day and he announces, you know what, we're not doing this anymore, and instead we're going to watch television commercials. That's what he did.
Wow.
And he threw out the curriculum and started bringing in VHS tapes, which members of your audience may know was a thing at one time. And we start watching ads, and I remembered that if it wasn't the first one, very early on, he pauses it in the first 5 seconds of the ad, and he points at the screen, and he says, let me ask you something. Is there anything here that's haphazard? Do TV producers just make random decisions? Why is that lady Asian? And this actress, and we all sat there staring at the TV screen, pondering this question. Why is that door red? Why is the light on this side of the screen and not on that side of the screen? Is any of this haphazard? Did they mean anything by this? And we spent an entire semester doing that. And I found the language of visual metaphor just fascinating. It led to taking a bunch of film courses in college. And many years later, when I'm now shooting vacations and shooting my kids, I find myself not shooting vacations and kids at all. I seem to be doing all kinds of other things and attempting to create visual metaphor. And I love doing it, much to my wife's annoyance on vacations. So I go finding my people. It takes mentorship, it takes people, it takes community a lot of times to go from not having a thing and realizing that I don't have the thing that I want and building it. And I found a lot of those people in Milwaukee and Wisconsin. So having found them and acquired myself a mentor, I start working it out. And I open up with a lot of dabbling, landscape and what I call urban landscape, urban stuff, street photography, but not a lot of this religious stuff that we're going to talk about later. And eventually this mentor of mine that I'd acquired says, you're never going to be Ansel Adams, and the world really doesn't need your mountain. But this stuff that you're doing over here, nobody else really can do. And it's intimate and it's rich, and you really should spend a lot more energy developing this as a thing for yourself. And I did. So today, my bodies of work include the stuff that we're going to talk about, my community. Milwaukee's got a subculture of urban fishermen. I don't know if it's truly the most waterways, but amongst the most waterways in an urban environment in the entire country. Who'd have thunk it? And cold. Milwaukee's got a lot of cold. And that I'm pretty sure I'm not the Ansel Adams of Milwaukee's cold, but I do love photographing it very much. So it makes for another body of work for me.
Love that. Yeah, I feel like when people envision Wisconsin and Milwaukee, they don't necessarily think of beautiful landscapes, but I have a friend of mine named Brent Clark who's been on the podcast who lives in your fine state of Wisconsin, and he's got some fantastic landscapes from there. So I think it's all in kind of how you approach it and how you connect with that place. Yeah,
I think we're going to get into it more, but in thinking about convention ahead of this discussion we were going to have today, because we're going to do a lot of talking about flouting convention today too. I was thinking about Michael Kenna. So Michael Kenna's work, if people out there don't know him, I consider him one of the masters. I think you should go Google it. So he takes a lot of stuff which is otherwise ostensibly landscape, but it looks very much like Michael Kenna's stuff. And in much of it, you would have no idea where he's actually taking this photography. I think a lot of it's actually in Japan, but there's nothing that looks obviously Japanese to a lot of these photographs, but it's clearly Michael Kenna's, and it's unique spectacular, influential, right? And I don't think it takes Yosemite to create unique, spectacular, influential. I think it takes having a unique artistic voice.
100%. All right, awesome. That sets the stage perfectly, Seth. So let's talk about the book, man. First of all, thanks for sending me a copy. Super cool concept. I really love the photography in here. Love the storytelling. I want to kick us off by talking a little bit about something you wrote about in the introduction. And the name of your book is A Trustworthy Home. So in the introduction, you talk about an experience when another photographer wanted to photograph you. And when you kind of realized that he saw you as kind of like a trophy that he could check the box on, you declined. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how and why so many photographers treat their subjects as trophies and how that impacts how we approach the artwork and perhaps how that might not be the best approach.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that, actually. I think about it a lot, not just my own experience there, but as something of an ethos, because something that I also write there is that when you love the people that you're taking photographs of, then the art just looks different. And I might be an aspiring artist. It's true. I'm looking to make art. I want to take pictures, and these people are going to end up in my pictures. But I love them very much. And loving people very much comes through. A person comes through in their own artwork. As far as the question as to why photographers are hunters, it feels like a time immemorial kind of question. War photographers go to places where there's war. Journalists go to places where there's unpleasant things happening because they're there to capture the moment, to document, to get something new and interesting. I think in the world of social media, it's much worse. I'm not a fan. That might come up again later also, but I think in the world of social media, it's a much worse thing because the incentive of getting clicks and hearts and all of this stuff for having gotten a really punch you in the face, saturated image of a particular archetype is really high. The incentive structure for that is super, super high, and I think it's really hard to say no to. So if it was always true, that a war photographer's got to go to war, you got to go get and you're going to see terrible things, but that's the subject, right? That's always been a thing of photography, capturing the thing. But I think today, the incentives exacerbate the sense that you're raising now.
Yeah, and I think to your earlier point about photographing the people you love, and for me, photographing the places that I love. When I see a body of work from a photographer where there's kind of a serial, I'm out there just to capture the trophies, if for lack of a better term. I feel like it kind of comes through in the work in terms of it doesn't seem like it has a soul. The photographer isn't coming through in the work. And I've just found the more and more I get into studying photography and consuming a lot of photography because I have a competition where 13,000 images are submitted every year. I look at a lot of stuff, and I find that you can kind of see through that approach to making images to some degree. I'm curious if you agree with that.
I do. I think part of the point you're making is that digital photography also kind of exacerbates it. I'm not limited by making 5 precious, slides that cost $7 a piece. Now I can take 1,700 pictures in a sitting and I'll just send them. Right. And I can collect all the stuff that I want, and it's all about volume. I'm not sure if that is the point you're making, but if it is, I agree. I think that also has something to do with it. And just being honest, between us intimate friends and the and the people who tune in on YouTube, I think that the nature of unearthing something rare, of finding something unique, special that only I found, that only I know how to get at, I think that is the name of the game for all photographers on some point of a spectrum. I think there's, if you want to call it ego, we can call that ego. But there's something about the win, which is, the name of the game. And whether it's in sports, in getting it just right, or whether it's in conventional wedding photography, just right, or getting something really gritty and nasty on an urban street that exactly demonstrates the thing that you are trying to get, I think the whole thing boils down to something which is rare, which is maybe even ineffable, that you're able to say something through it or tell a story through it that's only yours to tell. And look, I do that too. One of the reasons why I love being an insider and shooting as an insider is because I get to tell a story that I'm semi-certain that there is nobody else in the world who is able to do what I'm doing right now. And if I was shooting landscape, that would absolutely not be the case. The Likewise, I tell everybody who will listen in the photography world, be an insider. Like, think about it that way. So you've got family, you got a family business, you've got friends who've got a family business, you've got an extended hobby group that you're a part of. You've got a thing that you know about or that you're connected to or that you got access to that other people don't, and they trust you in a way that other people don't. I was talking to a woman at a photography event recently. She's asking me a question just like this, and I think what I was telling her actually is probably kind of impractical, but it makes for a good metaphor anyway. She was saying she's a retired teacher. She wishes she could find this kind of insider status somewhere like what I'm talking about. And I said, you can tell the story of the classroom teacher in a visceral, raw, intimate, honest way that like no one's ever told before. You could be like the Dorothy Lange of telling the story of like how pedagogy for children. That's who you can be. You could be the Ansel Adams of the classroom. And she was like, oh, it's maybe illegal. Like you can't taking pictures, taking pictures in classrooms is maybe a thing. Fine. So fine. Maybe that blows up my metaphor, but still, having the trust of the people around you is everything. It's everything when it comes to being able to capture that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and as it relates to nature and landscape photography, there's a huge trend of, it's been this way for a long time, but people like, oh, I'm going to go here now, and now I'm going to go there, and now I'm going to go here. I really want to encourage people, like, find 2, 3, 4 places that you love and just keep going back, right? Because you're going to keep developing that connection with that place. You're going to have much more awareness about what happens there in terms of the light, the seasons, the subjects that are there. You're going to become much more familiar with how things operate there. And as a result, I'm pretty freaking sure the photography is going to be better too, right?
Yeah, in fact, Matt, I would even go further than that. And I would say that this whole idea of insider that I'm standing on the shoulders of here, I think it's easily applicable to landscape and nature too. And it's exactly in the vein that I think you were just saying, that I think there's a real big difference between, let's say, hiking the same trail every day on the same mountain in every season with your kids and repeatedly camping and going off trail, and you know where all the down trees are, and you know where light's going to be, and you know the patterns of weather, and you know where all the animals are and which animals and when, right, and what they eat. And that I think makes you an insider. You know what to expect, where to be. You have an intimate insider knowledge of what's going to happen on that mountain, as say opposed to simply showing up at the Grand Canyon on an afternoon and hoping you get the light that you're going to want to work with, or like going and Googling, when should I be, at Clouds Rest or something like that. That is not the same thing. So to show up at a famous place and to capture the thing that everyone captured and haphazardly making it happen merely for the spot that you're at is everything about being an outsider. You're not a native to Clouds Rest, but you are a native to your backyard or to that hillside, like right outside town.
And not to contradict what we're saying, but like one of the things I personally do love in terms of stretching my creativity and challenging myself is going to a place I've never been to before, intentionally not doing much homework in advance of that visit and trying to make sense of it for the first time through a fresh perspective. And I think like that's where the wheat gets separated from the chaff in terms of a good photographer versus a great photographer is someone who can consistently show up to a place they've never been to before and create good work. So I'm not saying it's like a bad approach, but I think like what you can get out of those experiences is going to be vastly different.
I even actually put them in 2 categories. I think it's really 2 different things. So like what I'm talking about is building a body of work. And I'm talking to photographers who'd be in your audience whom are thinking, how do I build a material body of work in which I'm able to pull something out of a grouping which is going to give me an advantage and get me something closer to magic. That's what I'm talking about. Of course, I mean, like, I want to mix it up too. I will
Right.
go. I'm going to go walk downtown, and I'm going to shoot people, and it's not what I'm best at, and I'm going to do it anyway because it mixes it up, and I get excited. In fact, the truth is, again, between us intimate friends, Matt, I get a little bit reckless sometimes when I'm out with a camera. I start just going, and maybe even going places I shouldn't even be going, and just because there might be something new and interesting to see. It's a drug. Like it is for all photographers. So of course, you want to mix it up. But I think when I'm building a body of work, consistency, developing a voice, developing a consistent voice, a kit, like a consistent kit, a consistent approach to post production. I think those are key. And the places where you're going to probably have the most advantage in doing all of those things are in the places where you're already familiar.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the book. So your book specifically explores Orthodox Jewish weddings in a super, super unique way, part cultural tour, part emotional study. How did the idea for the book first take shape for you?
Yeah. So the genesis comes from a family friend who was familiar with my work, and asked me to shoot the edges, what she called the edges of her kid's wedding. And at that point, I was still thinking of myself as a budding, emerging fine artist, and this was everything that was not fine art in my mind.
You're
But
like,
because,
really? A wedding?
yeah, a wedding, really? Do you know who I am? Like I have a rep, bro. And this was very much not in keeping with who I saw myself becoming in the moment. But she was close. She's close to our family. I wanted to do it for her. And what I found in the outcome, in the product of that, was not just those comments that I told you about from my mentor, who said something like, "This is different. This is rich. This is something you need to double down on, and you're not Ansel Adams. And I really think you need to be directing energy over here," which, by the way, as an aside, is a key. That's a key element of mentorship. It's not squashing, and it's not building up and patting me on the head, but redirection and focus for improvement. That's where a lot of the big wins are. So I started spending more time on it. The theses of the book develop over time, but the focus on that as a place where I clearly was able to gain something which was going to be a place where my voice was going to gain traction as an artist, that started early. And that started with that one wedding. The cultural tour part is simply because in developing the book itself, there's just too much in a lot of these photos for me to explain it all in captions. And I'm doing my best to make it a book for everybody, in the sense that I want to tell you a little bit about what's going on here, or you're just left with the sense that I'm just not part of it if you're not familiar. But at the same time, I don't want to squash it with captions and text. At the same time, I'm leaving a little bit of mystery there on purpose. There are expressions on people's faces that I know exactly what's happening in this person's head, and I'm not going to tell you about it. I'm just going to tell you just enough to bring you into my world, enough that I want you to wonder what is happening there. So that's the cultural tour part of it, just enough to make it a worthwhile tour, not enough to rob you of the mystery, I think.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really liked about it was that the pictures could have been captured 40 years ago. Like you can't really tell in a lot of them whether it would be like 2025 or like 1975.
Well, I mean, I think you're being charitable with 1975. It could have been 1675 in some of those pictures. So these particular flavors of Jews, of whom I'm a local and a native. So for reasons that are way beyond the scope of the podcast, maintain traditional dress that dates way, way back. And a lot of it has to do less with it dating way, way back than being unique. That it keeps us in part as a unified, unique group, and that it's a part of the uniform. And wearing uniform sometimes really does make a difference. There's elements also there that I think are timeless and universal beyond uniform, though. And I think one of the reasons why people react the way you're reacting in part is not just because of like the archetypical stuff that you're going to see in somebody's hat. It's in quintessential stuff which is happening between people. There's something that others are recognizing there, which is very, very old, and it's very deep, and it's very rich, and it's clear. It's right there in the photo, and it's beyond the furry hat. There are interactions there, and I culled many of these photos to try to build out as big an arc of them as possible. There's many of these interactions are speaking paragraphs of stuff of what's transpiring between these people, the people and the places, the people and the events, and a lot of the reason why that is because it's so old, because it's so deep and so rich.
Yeah, that helps a lot. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm guessing from a practical perspective as a photographer, in a lot of ways, that makes your job a little bit easier because from your perspective as the insider, you're tuned into all of that history and all of those commonalities about emotion and expression and ritual that allows you then to be like, oh, I know what's happening here. Gonna get that because I know what that means and this and this, but I'm gonna do it in a way that, like you said before, it makes the viewer, especially a viewer who might not be within that culture, go, wow, that's fascinating. What's happening here, right? So
yeah, there is a double-edged yes to your initial question. Like, is that helpful is that one of the
Yeah.
big upsides of being an insider? 100%. Like, I know where
right.
people are going to be, and I know what's about to happen, and like I'm swimming literally in the same waters as these people at that moment. I'm part of the conversation, and I'm shooting as I'm part of the conversation. So is that logistically helpful? 100%. There's a thing that I'm working against, though, also at the same time. And you're really touching on it a little bit. I'm working against archetype deliberately. There's a lot of thematic tension between the few and the many, between individuals and groups that are in the book. And it's a theme of other work that I've done also. And a lot of Jewish art tends to focus on thematic. It can be very utilitarian. It can tend to focus on the group. And even if it's not art, you can imagine, maybe you can't, but some of your listeners can probably imagine a photo of a whole bunch of Holocaust survivors, a wedding or a wedding painting is a very iconic kind of Jewish shtick. A photograph of a funeral in Israel in which you could have like 10,000, because we show up en masse for big funerals, so you could have 100,000 hats. Like big repetition stuff, but like I don't know a single thing about any one of those individuals. And personally, as an artist, that rankles me. And so like I set off on a mission to go learn a lot more about these individuals. So here's the upside. The upside is that I can play that archetype that I know that you can see. I know that everybody can see the hat, and I know that they can see the archetype. And I can use that and tweak it and show you individuals underneath the hat. It works against me in that you see the hat, and that it's so archetypical that it can be challenging to get over. And sometimes as an artist, I might even think that I've done the job, but I really haven't, because the archetypical stuff of it is so strong that I'm actually not overcoming it. It's a push and pull challenge for me in the work that I do.
That's really interesting because I don't belong to a culture like that per se, but the closest thing I could think of, metaphorically speaking, was like my connection with aspen forests in fall. And like I go to them every year, have forever. And whenever I'm in an aspen forest and I notice something about the forest that's different, like to me, it's like immediate. Like I recognize it right away, and I'm like, ooh, I know there's a photograph here now because of something that's happening here, whether it's the shape of the trees. Like, for example, I did this hike, maybe 6 years ago now, to the top of this windswept ridge. And it was the first time I'd ever seen what I saw, which was all of the aspen trees up there. They were like 5 feet tall and they were super thin and skinny, and they were like bent and warped and like twisty. And I'd never, ever, ever seen aspen trees look like that in my entire life. And I was like, man, I gotta figure out a way to capture this. So like having that recognition of those patterns and understanding those like individual differences within that population, I think can lead to a richer photographic journey as well.
But in your milieu, so you're out in an aspen forest and you're seeing something which is different. But I'm not an aspen expert. You know what I see?
Right.
I see an aspen forest. That's what I see. So how do you so I mean so you're working on this. Like how do you overcome that when you're actually trying to demonstrate the different thing? But it could be that a viewer really is only going to see literally the forest and not the trees. I feel like I'm going to start working on this pun a lot. But go ahead, Matt. How are you going to overcome my seeing that aspen forest and seeing the different thing instead?
I mean, that's the beauty of something like a book or a website where you have control over the order of presentation, right? So, for example, in a website gallery, it might behoove you then to show somebody three images that show your typical aspen forest. And then the fourth image is like, boom, this weird thing that's happening. And then maybe a little bit of narrative within there that kind of clues the viewer into kind of what you were tuned into or whatever. So I think a lot of it has to do with how you present the work in my mind.
Yeah.
I don't,
Yeah,
about you.
I'd agree. I think it comes down to technique and structure and being able to juxtapose it against other stuff. For instance, maybe you don't just show this one difference. Maybe you show five things before it, and then here's the one which was different.
Right. And I mean, and that's
Yeah,
where composition becomes so important too, because, you know, like there are compositional tropes that people should avoid, right? Like putting bright or super dark or different objects close to the frame because it draws attention, leads the viewer off the frame.
sure.
However, that can be used to your advantage when that's the only thing that's different. So like you could put that weird different tree closer to the edge, or maybe that set of trees that has leaves on it and none of the other trees has leaf on it, and put it, instead of putting it in front and center, put it in a weird place in the composition closer to an edge that forces the viewer to have a little bit of uneasiness and tension. So I think there's compositional tricks you can do as well to kind of play into kind of what you're trying to force the viewer to see.
100%. I think being able to also voice that kind of thing to a mentor also that helps a lot because sometimes I think that my creative idea of putting something right on the edge of the photo was genius, but nobody else sees my genius. Like I'm in fact not succeeding with showing you the interesting different thing. I'm just merely making a compositional sin. So sometimes that's working and sometimes it's not. But I 100% hear what you're saying. I mean, if you can tinker with composition, tinker with classical art fundamentals, you can also highlight stuff just by breaking convention that otherwise is not easy to highlight.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're familiar with Sam Abel. He was a Nat Geo photographer, and I heard him give a talk, and he was talking about horizons. You know, like that behind me, like the horizon of a landscape. And the way he explained it, and it's just stuck with me, is like in any given nature or landscape photo, like the horizon is such a powerful compositional tool. And oftentimes we get it wrong because we let things creep up into that horizon that we don't want the viewer to draw attention to. And what we should be doing is trying to think about ways in which we can use it to our advantage because it's such a strong line that runs right through the photo. And how can you use it to your advantage in that way? And so there's ways to do it. You just have to know about those little tricks in order to take advantage.
100%. And by the way, I'm a huge Sam Abel fan, National Geographic photographer, and again, whom I consider one of the masters and greats. People should go look up his stuff. There's a YouTube talk, B&H Photo Space talk that he's got. It's like an hour and a half. The way the man talks about photography is
It's
it's
awesome.
like religious. It's a spiritual thing. It's meditative. It's the most beautiful photography talk I've ever heard. He actually could. You mind if we dwell on this for just 1 second? There's two.
Yeah, yeah.
He had a very big influence on me in a couple of ways, and it comes through in the work of this book. Actually, also, there's two things that I remember a whole bunch of things from that talk, but there's two things in particular, technique wise, that I remember him saying that I really, really adhere to, that I liked a lot. One of them is that blue is the enemy. Blue skies are the enemy. They obliterate, they distract, They pull people away from your purpose. I saw this years ago, so I think I'm adding a little bit to it. That's basically the point, that I've got this important thing, and then I've got this huge blue saturated sky, and nobody can see anything you wanted them to see because they're just seeing your giant blue sky, which is bad. So he likes iron gray, basically. One of his really famous photographs is of, which I'm sure is copywritten and you can't bring up here, but anybody could go Google it. It's cowboys, and I think they're about to neuter a cow or something like that. So there's a guy and he's got a knife in his mouth, and there's people riding behind him, and it's very dramatic. Iron gray skies. And the way I remember him talking about that particular image is those iron gray skies are forcing you into there. It's a canvas. It's forcing you in. That's one of the things that influenced me so much to focus on black and white specifically, actually, was that thought from that talk. There's another thing that he focuses on also, about micro separations between elements within a frame. And I shoot really, really cluttered environments with a lot of people and a lot of stuff, and it's very chaotic. And I'm hearing him talking in my head, almost like separate the stuff. Like I need this guy to be separate from this guy to the extent possible, and that's often impossible. But like I'm striving for that in all of the stuff that I'm working with, and it's again a tremendous influence on the work that I do today.
Yeah, the separation stuff is so crucial, and I wish I would have learned it so much earlier in my journey. But one thing that he talked about that stuck with me is how he uses layers. Like he's got just like the way he sees composition in these different layers that kind of push you up and through the scene, and like the layers all have purpose and meaning, and that intention through composition, I think, can like dramatically improve your photography.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Alex Webb. More on layers, your audience could also go look up Alex Webb if they're into people, if they're into the kind of stuff that I shoot, complex, chaotic groups, and somehow making order of them. Alex Webb is especially famous for this kind of thing that you're talking about. One of the interesting things about Alex Webb, I hope we're not going too far afield here, but like you were asking earlier about like how do you make about caring about people when you're just out there searching for trophies? Like everybody's hunting for gold, something rare. Alex Webb's photographs have a lot of strangers collected into them, and you care about those people. He collects visceral, interesting, deep, rich moments, like in places like Havana. And those people don't look like trophies to me. He's catching something really, really honest, and he's very famous for the layering that I'm talking about also. And it's a good reference point for anybody who's interested in looking for examples of that kind of work.
I love that. Well, you had already almost kicked us into a nice segue, and then we got deviated for a second because you were talking about how this could be like a religious experience. And in the book, you describe the weddings that you photograph as deliberately transcendental experiences. I'd love for you to unpack for us what that means and how that insight has shaped your visual approach to photographing them.
Sure. So what I mean by that is that, and I can only talk about the stuff that I'm observing. So I'm not making any religious statements, and I'm not an authority to make any kind of declarations here. But I can tell you about the feelings that I'm having as I'm there, honestly, and I can tell you the feelings that other people are sharing with me. There's an arc of life at these weddings. And all of the points on this big arc are emphasized really strongly. Infants, toddlers, even when they're freaking out, real old people, intense young men and women, bride, groom, rabbis, witnesses, all the players, right? And they're all on this big arc of experience. And there's something that I might even call, like maybe the transcendental part of it, maybe a hyper empathy about it, that I'm so focused on observing, because that's a really big part of Jewish weddings, is observing the proceedings. I'm so focused on this observing that I'm taking on elements of other people's experiences, like 1 second at a time. For instance, I'm not just remembering being the young man of my 20s. I am the young man of my 20s, for a second. I'm relating so hard to this kid who cares about not the 20-year-old, about the 4-year-old who cares about none of this, that I'm one with that kid. I'm relating to experiences in such a hyper focused way that I've never even had before myself, like actually walking a kid down the aisle or like being in a walker, that I'm absorbing little elements of those experiences. Somebody that I interviewed for the book said there's a moment in the proceedings in which the rabbi is filling out a contract and he's explaining the elements of the contract to the groom. He does so in a kind of a grandfatherly mentoring way. And and then everybody gets up and they go out to the wedding. So there's somebody who described watching that moment. It's all done in public. I'm sorry to interrupt myself, but that's all done in public. I guess that could be done in private, but it's all done with like, 200 people watching. So somebody that I was talking to for the book said in those moments, I myself am taking on a mantle. I am literally escorting that kid into adulthood. This young person into the rest of their life. It's not that I'm watching the rabbi mentor. It's that like I'm doing that myself. And then when we escort them out, I'm the one doing the real escorting here. I'm bringing this person out like a parent. Somebody else said something to me like, I can remember what it's like to be me again, by which he meant he's watching like a 4-year-old. He's watching a 5-year-old. He doesn't remember what it's like to be a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old. He's so deeply in touch with the experience of this kid, even for a second, that it's again what I'm describing as transcendental. What maybe you would describe as hyper empathetic.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I love about the visual arts is that it can transport you not only to place but also to experience, and also like I don't know if you've watched Adolescence on Netflix. It's like it's very short.
Heard of it?
4-part.
Haven't caught it.
It was really good, and not to spoil it, but like there's a probably 15-20 minute scene where this psychologist interviews this kid who was accused of murder. And I went to school for psychology, so like I was very easily able to put myself in her shoes because I've been through a lot of those situations in my professional career. And man, that was a powerful scene. Like just being able to like put myself in that scene, but the way that they filmed it, the way that they composed it, the way that they used the camera movements, like made that possible, right? Like you could have heard it, you could have heard a transcript, but like actually watching the way that they manipulated that room with the cameras made that possible, right? And so those transcendental experiences that you're describing, or perhaps like maybe something more simple like what I like to do, like try to transport people to these really spectacular moments of nature. Like that's the really fun thing we get to do as photographers.
Well, you bring up an interesting point that visually that's not so easy to do. And so there's a couple of things that I'm coming back to a whole bunch of times in the book and that seem to at least get us there a little bit. One is easy juxtaposition. So I'm doing a lot I love the format of a book, by the way. You can play with layout, you can play with pages. There's just a lot of tools available to me that otherwise, and I can give it just a little bit of text and like put all those things together, and I'm able to do something that I just simply can't do like while somebody's scrolling through their phone. So like if I've got young and old, and I've got men and women, and I've got fews and manys, and I've got living and dying. You can put there. Those are easy starts on gaining that kind of message. Another easy start on gaining that kind of message that also might be helpful for other people who are listening is again focusing on the edges. Cartier-Bresson, I think we should talk about that a little bit too. But like Cartier-Bresson had a particular methodology of focusing on the edges that was especially inspirational to me for this kind of work. So when I'm focusing not on the spectacle, not on the main event, but when I'm focusing on the reactions of people and concentrating on this, physically turn away from the spectacle and watch the people. So you're able to see stuff coming across people's faces that just is not possible if you're watching the spectacle. If you're watching the spectacle, then you're watching the big event and everyone knows what the big event looks like. But if I'm watching you on the outer perimeter and I'm watching you process a very complex emotional thing, there's something really mysterious about the look on your face now. Mm-hmm. And everybody wants to know what's on that guy's mind. It's different. It's interesting. And with a little bit of juxtaposition and contrast, and with that kind of curious, unique expression that you can catch if you're looking outside, with a touch of text. Now I've got maybe the ability to communicate a little bit of this transcendental shtick that I'm talking about.
I love that. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned on the edges because as a person who I studied psychology, as I mentioned earlier, and when I'm at those big events, I often find myself attracted to the edges, like watching other people and watching how they interact with the moment and like I try to figure out what's going on in their minds. And I think that's the beautiful thing about photography is that you can show the world a different thing that maybe they're not used to paying attention to.
Well, I think that's right. I think you can show them something that they're not used to noticing. I think the easiest way to do it also is by blowing up convention or what they're expecting to otherwise see. And there's a couple easy ways to do it. When I was a younger man, and this is in fact relevant, but when I was a younger man, I did some traveling. I spent the better part of a year in India and South Asia, and I ended up watching a lot of Indian TV and movies. And it's not that it's like all wrong to the American mind, but like there's stuff that you've been bred since birth to know as cues that are coming, that they're gonna cue you into something that either are different or they don't exist, or they're drastically like on their head. I remember seeing a romance scene in which there was action music playing over it and thinking like, what is going on here? Like
What's happening?
There's something so not right happening on screen. And like I could basically understand, you don't need to understand a lot of language to understand what's happening on screen. I just felt like something is really off. There's slapstick that comes out of nowhere and dance scenes that come out of nowhere, and everybody in the theater knew this was coming except me. So if you violate a couple of norms, it's so jarring. But jarring allows people to think a little bit outside the box too. And I found those moments incredibly eye-opening, funny, interesting. Those are some of the most memorable moments of my whole trip. Sometimes, actually, when I was the only one who was not seeing that dance scene is about to start, and I think in photography, we have a lot in our toolbox that's like that also. So convention would involve shooting a ring on a finger, stepping on a glass, and everybody saying Mazel Tov. There's a signing of a contract. There's people dancing. There are family members, specific ones, by the way, specific family members that are dancing, and they're dancing at particular times and catching all of that. And those are all important milestones. The pro photographers are paid to get that stuff. They're paid to produce a product, and you've heard recently on this very show, some anti convention wedding photography of late too, and I don't want to sound like I'm beating up on wedding photographers. Like, you need that product. People want it, and it's important for them, and they want that beautiful documented thing forever. But that's not what I'm there to do. I'm not there to create a product, and I'm not getting paid to do it. I get paid to sell books and print prints sometimes. And the things that I find most interesting that are there are the things that are happening between people, the things that tell me something which is richer and deeper and more intimate and rarer, like we were talking about earlier. And those things are often found specifically by not watching the main event. Those things are found by violating that stuff of convention and shaking people up a little bit. We mentioned a minute ago Henri Cartier-Bresson, if this is a good place for the segue. I think this is a good place to talk about it too. So Henri Cartier-Bresson shot a coronation real famously in Britain in 1937. And he did so by shooting everything except the actual coronation itself, which at the time was innovative and creative, and today maybe just simply called street photography. But when he's doing it, he's like the creator of this whole phenomena that we today just put out on Instagram and call it a day. Then he's inventing a whole art form itself. And if you look at those photos, you're going to see quintessential Britishness. You see stiff upper lip. You see duty. You see connection of the people. In a way that doesn't really exist in the United States at all, mm-hmm. Right. Certainly not relative to that. You see generational passing of torches, and he does it all because he's a genius. He does it all with mind-blowing art, classical art fundamentals. You see people stacked up in crazy ways. You see repetition of patterns. You see big geometrical stuff, huge strong triangles. I can think of one, two men with a woman on their shoulders. She's sitting on their shoulders, and they're making like this perfect strong triangle, and there are domes around her head, like in the horizon. And I don't know how he managed to arrange that, but you got like dome, dome, head, and big strong triangle, dome. And what he's doing by doing all that stuff is shaking you up. He's letting you see something which is deeper and more meaningful, and he's doing it by specifically going anti-convention, but still using deep art fundamentals while he does it.
Something you brought up a minute ago, you mentioned you get to sell books and prints, but then in the same vein, you were talking about how you don't have to worry about selling a product, and there's a lot of freedom in not, having to stick to those conventions and not being a wedding photographer. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit about the tension for you between creating something that's personally meaningful, which obviously you've done, and monetizing that thing so that you can actually afford to continue to do it. Like, where do you draw that line, and where does that sit with you? Because I think there's a pretty big obsession right now with people like wanting to monetize their photography, and maybe I'm just overblowing it based on what I see on threads, but like a lot of people are obsessing about making money as photographers. And I think to me, it's like you're missing, like, for a lot of us, like 90% of the reason to do this is not about money. Like, so tell me about that tension for you.
That's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind is I once worked with a printer. We had a printer in Milwaukee here, who's since passed on, who was a kind of a pillar of the art and photography community here for many years. The guy told me when I was first starting out, he asked me, "What are you planning on doing?" He was looking through a portfolio of my stuff. He was interviewing me, and he was making a decision whether he wanted to work with me and put his printing name on my work. So he said, "What's your plan? Do you plan on making a living doing this?" And I said, "Absolutely not." I said, "I got a day job. Not only can I not imagine replacing my day job right now, but I don't think I want to. I think I want to be focused on this as a thing that makes me happy and which is beautiful." And he said, "Good, because I wouldn't work with you otherwise." He said, "If you thought that you were going to go pro, I'm here to tell you, kid, that you are not like gonna make it. Like maybe you make it as like a fine art artist that people love your work, but I'm looking at your stuff and you're not going to be a pro, and your stuff is not going over people's mantles." And that's, by the way, one of the moments I count as important mentorship that I eventually got. That was an important redirection. The truth is, though, that as a goal, my goal is to get the best, most optimal engagement with my art possible. I count social media as the lowest tier on the engagement scale. And the book, from my experience now, is by far the highest. Getting the book into more hands is higher, but when I do the ROI, when I do the math, because that's kind of the business that I'm in, my day job, when I do the math, and I start thinking, well, I'm going to spend thousands of dollars on a solo showing. If I put one together, let's say I made my own pop-up, and I spent thousands of dollars to get people in there. So let's say I get 100-something people in there for the thousands of dollars. Let's say I got my own solo showing as part of a museum or something like that, a gallery. I'm still spending thousands of dollars, and I'm getting maybe 100-something people to engage, and it's going to cost me thus X to really get people to really, really, really think about my work. If I'm in a show, so I spent hundreds of dollars, and I'm one of hundreds, and people walk right by my stuff and they give it a couple of seconds. If it's on social media, they don't even do that. They're just moving. So what I'm really wanting to do is thinking about how many people can I get my work into their hands that will produce the best possible ROI of engagement and meaningful experience of my work possible. So that involves selling. So really, then I need to be able to sell to put more prints in more people's hands because they're going to have a better experience. That's what leads to the desire to sell. Does it replace my day job? 100% not. Does it become a specific driver of lifestyle for me? Very unlikely. I can't imagine a scenario in which that happens. But do I really want to do that? And do I really want people to buy this stuff so that they can hold it and feel it and experience it in a way that I want them to experience it, because I'm finding that that's the optimal way to experience my art 110%. So therefore, I put energy into it.
Okay, so that leads me to another question. You've got this book, right? You've clearly spent some money on producing it, right? I only happen to know this because I've made several books for the competition I run. I know how expensive creating a book can be, and even like not a very high quality book is still expensive, right? So like, as artists, I feel like there's a little bit of ego sometimes. Like we have this battle between our ego and wanting as many people as possible to see the work, right? Which sounds like those are on the same team, but they're actually not, right? Because your ego says, well, I want this book to be like the most magnificent production that's ever been created, and I'm going to throw out all the stops, and I'm going to get the most expensive cover, and I'm going to get the best paper, and I'm going to get it's going to be like 300 pages, and it's going to cost me like, I don't know, $35, $40 a book to make this thing. Whereas like your artist side says, I'm going to keep my costs low, and I'm going to make as many copies as possible and get it into as many people's hands as possible. So my question is like, where's the sweet spot there, right? Like how do you make that decision in terms of, okay, I'm fine with this being the sweet spot in terms of ego versus my artist side of me? Does that make sense?
That isn't 100%. I relate deeply to all of that, and I agree with about half of it. So
okay.
I'll tell you, as far as the ego stuff goes, I think it's inseparable. We've touched on it a couple of times in this discussion, but it's just not possible to say that ego is not connected to these things.
Yeah.
I want to be associated with something great. I want to produce something great. I'm doing something that I think is probably unique within my world, and thus in the whole art world, as far as I'm concerned. And there's a lot about me, for 100%. Also, I've got this thing inside of me, like I think most artists can relate to. I've got this thing inside of me, and it's screaming at me. I come back with a card full of photography, and it's bursting to get out of me. I have to go into post-production. It's almost compulsive. I have to be able to show my work to the world, because if I don't, then I mean, I'm not going to die, right? But the compulsion that I've got to be able to show my art to the world, because if I didn't, then what justifies all of this is such a strong feeling. Of course I relate to that. I think as far as the ROI part goes, though, just because of who I am and how I'm built, I have an accounting background. I mean, like I'm built as a really conservative, risk-averse character, and so like when I was doing that work, I can tell you when I was doing the work of the production. So I had, because I don't want to diss anybody, but like a common paid-on-demand service produces a test copy for me, which was really expensive, and it's like this thick. The book that I end up ultimately printing, which was from Mixam, whom I ultimately could recommend for this purpose, is like this thick, and it's like 4 times cheaper. Right now, when people opened the book that I actually made, they said the quality here is so nice. They really like the experience. What that told me was that I'm not actually getting 5 times more experience for that book. I'm getting 5 times more of paper. That is true, like really thick paper. But like, I'm not actually getting 5 times better experiences for the people that are handling the books, because everybody who's handling my books tells me, I just love the quality of this book. And it's obviously lower. If you held them both in your hand, it's obviously lower quality. But the experience they have when they just have it is great. So I'm looking for that sweet spot. I'm looking for being able to deliver the best possible engagement to people as well as I can, as cheaply as I can, because, by the way, I wouldn't pay $120 for my book. I don't want that to be a barrier. I want people to be able to experience it and engage with it. And so it's kind of easy for me to put myself in that mode of thinking.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I've actually finished writing an entire book, and I've got it designed, and I'm like ready to roll, but like I keep bumping up against that problem of like, if I want as many people as possible to see the book, it means I have to decrease my personal expectations of how good it's going to like the quality of the materials would need to be less, right?
Right. Well, I can't. I don't know if it's. I don't know. I don't know if it's. I don't know if I should go start mentioning specific costs here, but I could tell you that the cost of a self-published book can be at for 100 or less pages, and especially if it's black and white, you can be under $15
Right,
really easily. And if you're
right.
under $15, and you could be less than that too. And so if you're under $15, then you're maybe charging 30 something, right?
Sure.
In order to like get people to engage and not make it a barrier. Make it, with shipping, it's 40 something, which is already in my mind, that's a lot for a book. But like a lot of the people it's worth it to them to buy a book in the first place. You're still in their territory. You haven't left their ballpark. If you have a conventionally published book and I've got a distributor, there's all things I learned in the process, but if I've got a distributor and I've got a team and I've got copywriters and I've got layout people dedicated and I've got materials that are way more than maybe the experience actually demands, now that my book necessarily costs like $125 and I just can't get that many people to engage with my art anymore. Again, I can't engage with my own art for $125. Like I'm not going to buy that book. So like I really, really was trying to find ways that was going to keep it manageable in a way that felt to me like it was going to be accessible to everybody.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I gotta show you something real quick, dude. So first of all, look at this thing.
Holy cow.
Okay.
What is that
So
thing?
I gotta show you this. So I recently had a really cool conversation with I'm sure you're familiar with Adorama.
Yeah.
They have a print lab called Printique.
Yeah.
And they want to potentially work with me on just promoting these books that they create. I think their market is like wedding photographers, like selling to the couple, like these really, really, really high end books. But for my audience, I'm thinking like it could be like like a portfolio book that you could show to like a gallery or really, a keepsake for yourself, like something to be proud of, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, all right, I'll make one. All right, let's see how
Just,
it
just,
looks.
just let's dabble. Just a test copy. Let's see how this comes out, we say.
Yes. Okay. So,
Holy cow. How many images is in that thing?
honestly, I don't remember. A couple hundred, maybe.
It's like,
100.
and when you're done with it, you could build it into the foundation of that building you're building, well, in the back. Like
Dude,
it could like
it's
serve as a cornerstone or something like
it's
that.
it's leather bound, right?
Yeah.
My wife was making tofu the other day, and it was in the box. And when you make tofu, you have to press it. She's
Yeah.
like, your new book makes a great tofu press. That's how heavy it is,
It's a
dude.
tofu press.
But
It's one of the
but
steps in front of your house.
dude, it's pretty dope. Like
Oh man. But it's gorgeous,
it's
right?
it's amazing,
It's
right?
amazing.
I mean, look at that.
Tell me again how many pages?
I think it's like 100. That's the other thing. The pages are thick.
Yeah.
But I want to say it's like 100 pages, something like that.
Wow.
Um,
That's 100 pages.
that's it. But it's like
It's
this super thick, high quality paper. I mean, just to buy something like that, it costs you like $800.
Yeah. So
But
listen,
it's not
you,
it's not something you like sell, like, but it's something that you would make to feed that ego side, like, oh, look at this cool thing I created, and like I can show to people
for
who come to my house or whatever. I mean, it's
right,
cool in that part, but it's not cool from a like I want to show the world my art perspective.
right. And again, I'd come back to so first of all, the thing's amazing. The
It's
thing
cool,
is,
but
yeah,
I
yeah, it's
mean,
super
it's
cool. There's just no doubt about it. And also there's no question that seeing my own work or anyone else's work, but I mean, my baby is beautiful. Seeing my work in its most well presented way, on really expensive paper in really large,
yeah,
in a really beautiful frame that costs a lot, to get done. Framing is so expensive. It feels amazing. I love it. So like
yes,
so nobody should misunderstand us as
oh,
saying,
totally.
yeah, that like quality isn't meaningful. It's not what I'm saying at all.
No,
I
no,
love
no.
I love it. I think what we're saying more is that um, it can create for other people such a barrier to entry that I'm frustrating my own goal ultimately. My goal really at the end of the day is I want as many people as possible to as optimally as possible engage with my work. Social media is on my bottom tier. The books are really on my top tier. The ROI on the book is a lot better than maybe on a pop-up solo showing where I went and rented a storefront. So I select this one. Let's give this one a shot. And I'll tell you, Matt, also I think the work is good. I think the book is good, and I don't. But in a sense, I don't think it's because it is so special that some of the reactions that have come back are just tremendously satisfying. I think a
Yes.
book produces a reaction in people, something emotional, something substantive, something deep that other things just don't do. And it's been a joy, one of the joys of my life.
Awesome, man. Well, I had a couple more topics I wanted to ask you about. We've touched on this a little bit, but as you know, majority of my audience is landscape nature photographers. Although maybe that's changing. I actually don't know, but for landscape and nature photographers who are listening today, how might your approach to photography, especially your emphasis on cultural context, trust, and story, enrich their own way of working in the field?
Yeah, that's a great question because a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today, I think, is really actually quite universal. One of the things that we've already touched on is avoiding convention. So I think the thing that my mentor said to me, "You're not going to be Ansel Adams, and you shouldn't try." I think it's true. I'm
Yep.
not going to be Ansel Adams, and neither are you. Not you personally, but like we're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
going to be Ansel Adams. The world doesn't need my mountain and it doesn't need my Monument Valley, but it does need the unique thing that I see in Monument Valley that other people don't see. And I think avoiding convention is job one, and is easily replicable as a mindset for nature photographers. I think consistency develops a voice. You recently had an interesting conversation on your podcast in which you and your guest were talking about, like, do we think about consciously putting ourselves into the art? And I think you had both eventually decided no. And if there had been a call-in option for that podcast,
You
I
were
would have
like,
called in. Yeah, I would have called in. I was ringing you as hard as I could, but you were not picking up. And I don't agree. Just respectfully, I
it's
think when
fine.
we make a decision about kit, for instance, you're making a really specific decision about how you want to tell your story to
Hmm.
other people. When I show up to a wedding, I'm specifically going without a flash. I'm shooting with a cheap mirrorless, mainly because it's really small. It's a small Sony. I'm using prime lenses, so I'm going to be using my feet, and it's three of them. It's a simple kit, and I'm going to be doing a lot in post because it's super dark and pitch black in there. I've already made 10 decisions about what my consistent voice is going to be and how I actually want to approach my art just there, right? Without anything else. And I think that the mindset of a nature photographer can be the same way. If you're going to be wide, it's going to be one way. If you're going to focus on detail, it's going to be another way. If you're going to specifically do it if you're specifically doing black and white versus color, it could also be a different way. It's your voice and it's a choice to make, I think, ahead of time. There's also, we talked about the idea of being an insider on a trail. One of the things that I think doesn't get talked about enough is discipline in warm up. Part of the way
Hmm.
I actually do this kind of photography is in the assumption that I don't feel anything at all. I don't feel any inspiration. I'm not with it, and I'm not gonna feel with it. I'm not gonna have a good night tonight. And when I oftentimes am starting on a trail or have just arrived at a wedding, I don't size up the light. I'm not looking for interesting things per se. I'm going to take 20 shots of nothing. So I already have the viewfinder up, and I'm shooting everything, and none of it's good, and that's fine. I do small scavenger hunts. Let's go find a couple of kids. Let's find interesting shadow. Let's find some juxtaposing angles. None of it's good, and that's fine, right? But you're working the muscles that are necessary to work. So I'd said earlier I grew up in Oregon. So in University of Oregon, there's a woman in the dorm that I was living in when I was a kid, who had a boyfriend who's coming up from California, who played Division II ball, which is better than any ball that I played, of course. And we played horse once when he was up there. We used to play when he would come up, and it was cinematic in the rain. Oregon, pouring rain. There's so much water on the court that you can't even dribble the ball, and everything is just perfect. it was magic and it's cinematic. It's like, and like I didn't even have to think about it. It's just bam, bam. Everything that came out of my hand, and him too. Everybody was perfect. And I think eventually I lost, but I keep on thinking about that game for the rest of my life, thinking, why can't I produce magic every time I just want to produce magic? That was actually a thought that I started having then. Why can't I have the best game of all time every single time I go out on the court? Apparently, I'm capable of it, and maybe I should play Division two ball. And the answer, of course, is because that's not a goal. That's not a correct goal. The goal is performing and executing at a really high level and incrementally improving consistently. And one of the ways to get there is to do layups when you walk out on the court. You don't go out there shooting the best game of your life. You do layups, you do passing drills, you do all these basics, getting yourself into it. It creates a flow in the mind. So it's a thing that we don't talk about a lot. It's just a basic blocking and tackling, a basic fundamental of, I think, getting ready to perform. Because I don't want to blow it. I got a couple hours at the wedding. I want to do good. But I think that's the way oftentimes it happens. It's not just by artistic lightning striking me in the moment. I think that's probably something that all disciplines probably can carry.
I love the metaphor of a warm up. It's not something I've ever tried to do necessarily, although I have had the experience where the first half day of a big trip, nothing really that good. But I think it's partly is because I'm going through those motions of getting back into it and remembering how to use the camera again and all those things. So
right.
I think it's a great exercise to think about.
Well, and just like everybody else, maybe like you were about to say, I've also had the experience of behind the camera being on fire, and totally undeservedly so. That artistic lightning strikes. Everything I do is perfect and memorable and printable, and it's all wonderful. And there's just something that was happening in this moment that I was able to simply capture it without warming up, without practicing, without thinking about it. And the danger of those is allowing people to think that it's going to happen again. It's like gambling. It's not going to happen again, not consistently. Artistic lightning is going to strike every now and then, but to consistently perform, that is not going to happen again. And I hate the sense of going out there and waiting for that lightning to strike and then missing the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting because I talk a lot in my workshops about mindset because I think a lot of people, especially people who pay a lot of money to travel, get to a place and they put these kind of expectations on themselves that they need to create some great photographs. And I always try to tell people your mindset really, to have the best experience here, you need to eliminate those expectations of yourself and just have a good time, focus on having fun. And I promise you, yes, you're going to make some bad photographs, but also you're going to make some really good photographs eventually. So take the pressure off. So I personally think a lot of it has to do with mindset, and also all of the failures you've had up to that moment are leading you up to the next moment. So I think it all,
like all things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like it.
Well, and even more so, the beyond drills, and warm-ups, I think the goal is important. And so so speaking about me, right? I travel to Yosemite. I've got one shot at Yosemite. I live in the Midwest, and getting to Yosemite isn't like a drive for me. I've got one shot. Let's make it good. Let's get good stuff. So there's a real assumption about what good actually means. Good means a thing like the picture which is behind you, sort of like something which is iconic, something that looks like it belongs somewhere, something that I formed an image in my head of what Ansel Adams should have taken in Yosemite. I should do that. That's a problem, right? When I go to, and that will create the kind of non-performance that you're talking about. Also, I'll struggle to be Ansel Adams, and it's not happening because I'm not Ansel Adams.
Right.
On the other hand, when I go to these weddings, I'm oftentimes focusing. I have mantras to myself too. So one of them is turn around. So I'm looking at the wrong thing. Turn your body. Move your body, physically do it. It's an important thing, even in a landscape context. Move your feet, turn around, and go look at something else and see what occurs to you. It sounds simple, but for whatever reason, once you're locked in and watching, it's hard. Open your eyes. I'm saying that to myself all the time. When I see a wedding going on, And everybody knows what a wedding looks like. The world doesn't need my wedding. I don't need another bride and groom. But you know what I do need? I need that guy's. So there's a guy who's kicking his leg over a knee and his foot is dangling out into the aisle. And there's Jewish stars on his sock. It's telling me something really essential about this guy and about the scene that is not really actually up there with the wedding. Open your eyes. Look at things which are not that. And see. When I'm concentrating on seeing things, I'm oftentimes in the flow that I think many artists feel and see. I'm seeing shape. I'm seeing contour. I'm seeing color. I'm seeing almost everything except sometimes the substance, which is right in front of me, and that can lead me into a place that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to get to had it been focused on, let's get Yosemite. I need Half Dome.
Yeah. No, that's perfect, Seth. I couldn't have said it better myself. All right, man. Well, my last question for the normal podcast is, who do you recommend for the show? Who's someone that our listeners need to know about?
I think everybody needs to know about Mark Mayo. Mark Mayo lives in Georgia. He has a specialty in retinal photography.
Retinal?
Eyeballs. That's one of his specialties. He leads trips to Isle of Skye and to Scotland. He did the final review of my book. I respect his work very, very highly. I think you should go check it out. It's online, and he's got a blog. Go check it out. I think you could have on, if you could find her, Lindsay Addario. Lindsay Addario made a book called "It's What I Do." She's not unknown at all. She's actually quite famous. But there's stuff in that book, and it was relevant to a lot of what we talked about today, which is there's a lot of war photography in it. It's very, very, very powerful stuff. I love it. It was an influence on me, and I love that book. And if you could get her, I bet she'd be a fascinating conversation to have. And then lastly, there is a local here named Cindy Hansen. I respect her work very much. She goes in the stylings of Cindy Sherman in many ways. She takes self-portraits that are fascinating. She turns out incredibly interesting stuff, also available to find online.
Perfect. Well, Seth, this has been incredible.
Pleasure's been mine. I've been looking forward to it for a long time listener, and really glad to spend the time.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me for another fun episode. A huge thank you to Seth Robbins for sharing such a thoughtful look at trust, culture, and storytelling through photography. I hope you all enjoyed this deeper dive into what it means to really know your subject and honor the story behind the image. If you want more from this conversation, please don't forget there's a bonus episode with Seth waiting for you over on Patreon, where we unpack even more about building trust and working from the inside out. And while you're at it, be sure to check out my recent video review of the Printique photo book that I mentioned during this week's episode. If you're curious about high quality book printing for your own projects, this will give you an honest look at what to expect. You can find a link in the show notes. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting it on Patreon. And as always, thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.